Los Angeles glowed the way it does on nights when the sky feels almost too soft, too warm, too forgiving. The rooftop restaurant shimmered with golden lights, reflecting off glasses and silverware, as if the whole city wanted to dress itself up for Michelle and Elliot's engagement dinner. But beneath all that beauty, something in Michelle's body whispered to her, a whisper she didn't want to hear. She noticed it when Elliot walked around to greet another guest. He always touched her lower back when he passed behind her, a silent "I'm here" that had become their private language. Tonight, his hand hovered, but never landed. A small detail, a missing moment, but it cut through her like a warning. Her smile stayed polite, warm, steady, but inside something loosened, like a button slipping free on a dress you thought was perfectly tailored. She tried to steady her breathing, tried to sink back into the music and laughter, tried to believe she was imagining it. But the truth is this: a woman always feels the shift before the world confirms it. Michelle sat straighter, her fingers brushing the edge of the tablecloth, grounding herself in the present. Yet every instinct she had, every lesson life had taught her, told her a crack had already formed. Just beneath the surface, quiet, sharp, she looked up at Elliot. He wasn't smiling, not frowning, not distracted, just somewhere else in his mind entirely. "Baby, you okay?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. His breath hitched, barely, a twitch in his jaw, a stiffness in his shoulders. Michelle watched his whole body pause in a way she had never seen, like his soul had stumbled over something only he could see. Her chest tightened. This was the emotional fracture, the moment when her heart whispered, "Something is changing." Climax A had arrived inside her long before she understood why, but Climax B was already walking toward them. Elliot lifted his champagne glass to toast with one of his business partners, but his hand froze mid-air, completely still. A hush rolled across the room, subtle at first, like the violins lost their rhythm, like conversations thinned out, like the rooftop itself sensed something shifting. Michelle turned to follow Elliot's gaze. That's when the world inside her cracked wide open. Standing at the entrance, a familiar figure, a presence loaded with history, holding a small boy at her side. The restaurant's soft chatter died instantly. Guests stared. Servers stopped mid-step. Someone gasped so quietly it felt like the air swallowed the sound. Michelle's breath left her body. The woman didn't speak. She didn't have to. The truth stood beside her, in the shape of a little boy with warm brown skin and eyes that matched Elliot's exactly. Michelle felt her heart drop into a place she wasn't ready to face. That was the disruption. The moment the night stopped pretending. The glamorous engagement dinner had been interrupted by a truth none of them were prepared to meet under these lights. Michelle's hope trembled. Elliot's fear surfaced. A painful understanding settled in the atmosphere. Anyone who has ever been blindsided by a truth they didn't ask for knows exactly how this moment feels. The resemblance was immediate, undeniable, devastating. But we won't reveal everything yet. Not what this boy means. Not how this truth formed. Not what it will break. Not what it will rebuild. We leave the door halfway open, because that's where real stories hold their power. Before we go deeper into this moment, if stories like this touch something real in you, take a second to like this video. It helps this story reach someone who might need it tonight. Welcome to Mr. Stevens Stories, where powerful life lessons are shared through unforgettable storytelling. If you're new here, we're glad to have you. Subscribe and join us for more inspiring stories that motivate, uplift, and open the mind. And before we continue, comment the time and where you are watching this story. I'd love to know who's sharing this moment with us. For a moment, Michelle couldn't hear anything. Not the soft violins, not the clinking glasses, not even her own heartbeat. All she could register was the sight of that child, the child who should have been a stranger, yet carried Elliot's features like a mirror. Her fingers tightened around her napkin, but she didn't stand, didn't react, didn't make a scene. Strength, especially the kind earned through life, doesn't always show itself loudly. Elliot stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor with a sound sharp enough to turn heads. His breath came uneven, his eyes locked on the boy, as if time had circled back to punish him. Michelle forced herself to inhale. Stay calm, she told herself. Don't let your pain teach you to perform for an audience. Why are you here? Elliot whispered. His voice trembled, not from anger, but from history. The woman beside the boy didn't step forward. She didn't flinch. She lifted Micah's hand slightly, guiding him with a gentle firmness that only a mother carrying years of weight could possess. Micah looked up at Elliot with quiet curiosity, his small fingers tightening around hers. Michelle felt a sharp heat bloom behind her ribs. Not jealousy, not insecurity, just a different kind of ache, the ache of sudden clarity. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was truth, walking straight toward them. Elliot exhaled, like his lungs were refusing to cooperate. It's really him? Michelle's voice was steady, but her throat tightened around every word. The woman finally spoke, softly, plainly. You said you didn't want him, she said. No performance, no rage, just the kind of honesty that carries scars. Michelle's chin lifted as if preparing for impact. The restaurant was silent, in a way that made people hold their breath instead of exhaling. A few guests pretended to look away, but their eyes kept drifting back, drawn to the rawness of the moment. Micah shifted, unsure of the tension around him. His eyes were wide, innocent, waiting for something he didn't understand. Elliot reached for the edge of the table as if he needed it to stay upright. Michelle, he whispered, please let me explain. She didn't move, didn't raise her voice, didn't cry. Instead, she asked a question so calm it shattered the air around them. Did you deny this child? Elliot closed his eyes, a man caught between who he once was and who he wished he had been. Yes, he whispered. Michelle felt her heart drop, not like a crash, but like a slow descent into a truth she never asked for. How long? She managed. Years, he said. I didn't believe. I wasn't sure. I made a choice I regret every day. Michelle's eyes glistened, but she blinked quickly, refusing to fall apart in public. That wasn't a mistake, she said quietly. That was a decision. The woman's posture softened, not in triumph, but in exhaustion. I didn't come to ruin your night, she said. He kept asking. He wants to know where he belongs. Micah tugged Elliot's sleeve. Are you my daddy? It was a fragile question, almost whispered, yet loud enough to tear through every wall Elliot had ever built. Elliot broke. Not dramatically, not noisily. He broke in a way only people who have carried too much guilt for too long can break. Quietly, completely. He lowered himself to one knee so he could see Micah's eyes clearly. His voice shook. Yes, he said. I'm your dad. The restaurant didn't breathe. Michelle didn't move. Micah looked relieved, almost shy, as if some small piece inside him finally made sense. Michelle's chest tightened painfully. This wasn't a scandal. This wasn't a twist. This was a child finding truth, and she couldn't hate him for that. Elliot rose slowly, turning toward her with devastation in his eyes. Michelle, I never meant to bring this to your doorstep. I never meant to hurt you. She stepped back, not out of fear, but because her heart needed distance. Space to understand itself again. Elliot, she whispered, I'm not leaving, but don't ask me to pretend this doesn't change everything. A soft, trembling breath left him. I know. A server finally moved, trying to resume normal service, but even he couldn't pretend this wasn't a rupture in real time. Michelle gently wiped a tear from her cheek. She wasn't angry yet. That would come later. Right now, she was heartbroken. And heartbreak is quieter than anger. Take him home, she whispered. He needs you tonight more than I do. Elliot froze. Michelle. Go, she said gently. It's not goodbye. It's just clarity. Micah looked up at Michelle, his voice small. Are you okay? That question, from a child who didn't understand the weight of anything, broke her completely. She crouched to his level. I'm okay, sweetie. You go with your dad tonight, all right? He nodded. Elliot lifted him into his arms. The woman stepped back, giving space for the shift happening between father and son. Michelle watched them move toward the elevator, a family forming in front of her, a future shifting in her hands. A moment she couldn't undo, even if she wanted to. As the elevator doors closed behind them, Michelle whispered to herself, Lord, give me the strength to face whatever this becomes. Heartbreak doesn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes softly, quietly, slipping through your chest before you even recognize the shape of the wound. That was the silence surrounding Michelle after the elevator doors closed behind Elliot and Micah. The rooftop restaurant still sparkled with expensive lighting. Laughter from distant tables tried to resume its rhythm, and servers attempted to carry on with their jobs. But something in the air had changed. A truth had entered this space. and truth does not leave without taking something with it. Michelle stood by the railing, gripping the cool metal, letting the city breeze brush her cheeks as she fought to stay upright. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths she didn't remember choosing. She had been prepared for life's challenges before. She had survived disappointments far deeper than this. But betrayal wrapped in innocence, that was a new kind of pain. Behind her, a few guests whispered about the dramatic moment they had witnessed. Their voices weren't cruel, just curious. Human curiosity has never been gentle, especially when people witness a heart-testing moment that isn't theirs. Michelle closed her eyes. This was supposed to be my engagement night, not the night she watched her future tilt sideways. Her throat tightened as she whispered to herself, "Hold it together, Michelle, hold it together." She didn't want to cry. Not here, not in front of strangers who didn't know her story or the weight she carried. But her body betrayed her before her pride could stop it. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Quiet, slow, painfully honest. She wiped it quickly, inhaling deeply as she remembered her grandmother's voice, the one that lived in her memory like a compass. "Baby, life gone test your heart, but don't let it make you forget your worth." "My worth," she repeated silently. "Remember that." She straightened. Inside the restaurant, the woman who came with Micah lingered near the exit. Her posture wasn't triumphant. She wasn't proud of tonight's collision. Her expression carried the exhaustion of someone who had been holding life together with her bare hands. Their eyes met for the first time. The woman nodded once, not in apology, not in challenge, but in acknowledgement. Two women caught in the gravity of the same man's past. Two women whose lives had been shaped, differently, painfully, by him. Michelle didn't look away. Pain recognizes pain. Eventually, the woman turned to leave, stepping out into the LA night with a heaviness Michelle understood too well. Michelle stayed where she was. For a long moment, she allowed herself to feel everything she had been holding back since the moment Micah walked in. Not rage, not jealousy, just heartbreak, the quiet kind that grows from disappointment more than anger. Her phone buzzed. A message from Elliot. "Please don't leave. I'm coming back for you." Michelle stared at the words until her vision blurred again. She didn't know if she could trust those words. She didn't know what tonight meant for their future. She didn't know if love was enough to carry them through this new terrain. But she did know one thing: this wasn't the end. This was a turning point, a breaking that might lead to rebuilding if they were both strong enough for the work. Michelle pressed the phone to her heart for a moment, then lowered it slowly. She whispered into the LA wind, "I can wait one night, Elliot, but this can never happen again." Her breath trembled. She turned away from the railing, took a slow final look at the shimmering city lights, and walked out of the restaurant, her steps steady, her spirit wounded, but not destroyed. Downstairs, the valet handed her the keys with a sympathetic smile, and she mustered the strength to return it. As she slid into her car, she whispered the prayer she used whenever life demanded more strength than she thought she had. "God, help me hold on to myself while everything around me shifts." Her hands tightened around the steering wheel. Tonight had rewritten her understanding of love, of trust, of Elliot, of her own heart. And yet, somewhere deep inside, she felt a flicker of something she didn't expect. Hope. Painful, fragile hope. Because even in devastation, she sensed this story was not meant to break her, just change her. That hope stayed with her as she pulled onto the freeway, the lights of LA stretching ahead like a reminder. Whatever comes next, she would face it, not as someone shattered, but as someone strong enough to rebuild. The elevator doors had barely closed when Elliot felt his entire chest tighten. Micah stood beside him, small fingers wrapped around his hand, trusting him without hesitation. A trust Elliot felt terrified of breaking again. He had faced conference rooms full of powerful people. He had handled decisions worth millions. But standing in a quiet lobby with a 6-year-old who called him daddy for the first time, that shook him more than anything boardrooms ever could. As they stepped outside, the warmth of the Los Angeles night hit him, but it didn't slow the storm inside his head. He could still feel Michelle's eyes on him from the rooftop, the hurt, the confusion, the crack in her hope. His stomach twisted. "Where are we going?" Micah asked, tilting his head up. Elliot swallowed. "Somewhere safe tonight." Micah nodded like that answer made perfect sense. Children often give grace adults don't deserve, and Elliot felt that grace settle heavy on his shoulders. A car arrived. He opened the door for Micah, lifted him gently into the seat, and buckled him in with hands that trembled more than he wanted to admit. Inside the car, The silence felt too loud. Not tense, just unfamiliar. The kind of silence between two people learning each other in real time. Micah kicked his little feet softly, humming to himself. No fear, no hesitation, just presence. Elliot finally found his voice. "Micah, what do you like to do?" The boy's face lit up. "I like basketball, and pancakes, and drawing, and cartoons." He paused thoughtfully. "And hugs." The last word cut through Elliot like a soft blade. He didn't know what he had expected, maybe shyness or distance, but this child wanted connection. He turned his eyes toward the window so Micah wouldn't see the way emotion washed over him. "How about we try one of those tonight?" he said. Micah grinned. "Pancakes?" Elliot nodded. "Pancakes." When they arrived at the Ocean View home, Micah stepped inside with the curiosity of someone entering a quiet museum. He set his small backpack on the couch and looked around. "Is this where you live?" "Sometimes," Elliot answered. "It's a place I come when I need space to think." Micah nodded, accepting the answer without judgment, without resentment. It was the simplicity of children. They see what's in front of them, not the layers adults hide. Elliot grabbed a blanket and pillow, placing them on the couch. "You can sleep here tonight," he said softly. Micah sat down, legs dangling. "Will you stay here too?" The question pierced him. "Yes," Elliot whispered. "I'll stay right here." Micah shifted closer, resting his head on the pillow. "Daddy." "Are you scared?" Elliot froze. The honesty of the question stripped him of every defense he'd built for years. "Yes," he whispered. "I'm scared because I want to do this right, and I don't want to hurt anyone anymore." Micah blinked slowly, the way children do when trying to understand grown-up feelings. He reached out and took Elliot's hand, so naturally, so confidently. "It's okay, I'm here." That simple sentence cracked something deep inside Elliot. He sat on the edge of the couch, watching Micah drift toward sleep, small breaths rising and falling in gentle waves. He had missed this. Not just nights like this, years like this, birthdays, bedtime stories, first words, first fears, first joys, 6 years he could never reclaim. Regret sat heavy on his chest until it almost hurt. After Micah's breathing evened out, Elliot quietly pulled out his phone. He stared at the blank message screen, unsure how to communicate everything inside him without overwhelming Michelle. He typed, deleted, typed again, deleted again. Finally, he let himself speak from the rawest part of his truth. Elliot's message to Michelle: "I'm here with him. He's asleep beside me. I'm not running anymore. I want him. And I still want you. I'm sorry for everything." He hit send before fear could stop him. Then he sat on the floor beside the couch, resting his head against the cushions. Micah shifted in his sleep, his small hand sliding onto Elliot's shoulder, as if claiming him. Elliot placed his own hand over it gently. "I won't disappear again," he whispered to the dim room. "I won't fail you again." He didn't sleep, not because of fear, but because he couldn't take his eyes off the boy who had just rewritten his entire life in a single night. The drive back to Inglewood felt longer than usual, even though Michelle had made that route countless times. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles pale against the leather. She didn't blast music. She didn't call anyone. She didn't try to distract herself from the weight sitting in her chest. Tonight wasn't about noise. Tonight was about facing the quiet. When she arrived home, she shut the door slowly behind her, leaning against it for balance. The apartment greeted her with stillness. No lights, no movement. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint smell of her vanilla candle from earlier that morning. She exhaled shakily. The silence wasn't comforting tonight. It was too honest. She walked into the kitchen, turned on the faucet, and poured herself a glass of water, a habit taught by her mother and grandmother. Drink before you speak in pain. Sit before you let tears rush you. Breathe before emotions turn to words. Michelle drank the entire glass in slow sips, grounding herself, letting her body catch up with the shock of the evening. Her phone buzzed on the counter, Elliot's name on the screen. She didn't open it yet. Not because she didn't care, but because she needed space to feel what was happening without being pulled into someone else's emotions, even his. Michelle walked toward the living room, kicking off her heels, and sat on the edge of her couch. Her hands rested on her knees, fingers trembling as she tried to steady them. She closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her eyelids, memories from childhood surfaced. the ones that never faded no matter how long you tried to outrun them. Her mother sitting at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. Her grandmother rubbing circles on the back of her mother's palm, whispering words of comfort. A man's absence felt stronger than his presence ever was. Promises that came easy, pain that stayed longer than love. Michelle had grown up learning that women in her family survived heartbreak, but they paid for it with pieces of themselves they never got back. She swore she would not be one of them. So seeing Micah tonight, innocent, sweet, unprotected, didn't make her angry at him. It made her afraid of becoming her mother in ways she never intended. She pulled her journal from her purse, the soft leather cover worn from years of hopes, fears, prayers, and late-night self-talk. She opened to a blank page, the emptiness waiting patiently for her truth. Her pen hovered for a moment before the first line finally came. "This hurts in a way I didn't expect." Her handwriting trembled, but the words flowed. I wasn't prepared to see a child with his face. I wasn't prepared to feel compassion for someone who represents a moment I didn't get to be part of. I wasn't prepared to feel heartbreak and sympathy at the same time. A tear fell, blurring the ink. She wiped it gently, then kept writing. "I don't blame Micah. I don't blame the woman. But I am struggling with the choices Elliot made long before he chose me." Her breath shook as the next thought surfaced. Am I strong enough for this? She paused, staring at the words. She didn't know the answer yet. She leaned back against the couch, holding the journal against her chest, letting the emotions rise and fall the way they needed. At some point, the weight became too heavy to stay seated, so she slid down onto the floor, the same way she did when life pushed her too hard and she needed the ground to hold her. Her knees bent, arms wrapped around her chest, forehead touching her hands. Tears fell freely this time, no resistance, no shame. It wasn't the loud grief of betrayal. It was the quiet grief of seeing a future you believed in shift. She whispered into the dim room, "God, I thought I was done with this kind of pain." But underneath the heartbreak, something else was growing, a truth she didn't want to admit out loud yet. She had seen Elliot kneel to answer Micah. She had seen the fear in his eyes turn into acceptance. She had seen him break in real time, not with excuses or charm, but with raw remorse. She had seen a man confronted by the weight of his choices and choosing to face them instead of run. That was new. Michelle pushed herself up from the floor and walked to the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. The reflection staring back at her was tired, but her eyes still held fire, the fire passed down from generations of women who survived, rebuilt, and refused to let pain define them. She studied her face quietly. "You're not her," she whispered. "You're not repeating the same story." She dried her face and returned to her bedroom, sitting on the edge of her neatly made bed. Her journal lay open beside her. She picked up the pen one more time and wrote slowly, deliberately. Maybe this moment isn't meant to destroy us, but to redefine us. The moment she finished writing it, she felt her chest loosen just enough to breathe again. Not relief, not forgiveness, just clarity. She leaned back onto her pillows, her mind replaying every detail of tonight. Not to reopen the wound, but to understand it. Micah's innocent eyes, Elliot's trembling voice, her own breaking heart, the quiet strength she found amid the wreckage. Storylines were shifting, identities were rearranging, but she wasn't losing herself. That mattered more than anything. At last, she reached for her phone, not to text, not to argue, just to hold it, the symbol of the conversation that would shape tomorrow. But tonight wasn't for talking. Tonight was for grounding. She placed the phone on the nightstand, turned off the lamp, and lay in the dark with one final thought easing into her mind. I can face tomorrow, because I'm still me. Michelle didn't sleep peacefully, but she slept with purpose. A heart still hurting, but beginning to heal in its own time. Michelle woke in the early hours with a heaviness in her chest that hadn't loosened since the rooftop. She sat up slowly, rubbing her palms together as if trying to warm herself from the inside out. Her room was dim, quiet, still carrying the remnants of last night's tears. Her phone lay on the nightstand, untouched, yet loud with possibility. She inhaled deeply. Tonight wasn't about running from the truth. It was about understanding it. She picked up the phone, turned it over in her hand, and finally unlocked the screen. Elliot's name sat at the top of her notifications, waiting like a soft knock on a closed door. Michelle hesitated, then opened the message. Elliot's text, "I'm here with him. He's asleep beside me. I'm not running anymore. I want him, and I still want you. I'm sorry for everything. Her breath slowed. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't decorated or polished. They weren't written to impress her. They were simple, painfully honest. Michelle pressed the phone to her chest, closing her eyes. She wasn't ready to respond, not yet, but she could feel something shift in her spirit. Not forgiveness, not certainty, but a release, a softening. She needed space to carry her own truth before she carried his. She walked to the living room, curling up on the couch with her blanket wrapped around her legs. The early morning light filtered through the blinds, stretching across the floor in slow, quiet lines. The world outside was still asleep. It felt like the only time she could think clearly. Her mind drifted back to Elliot kneeling in front of Micah, the tremor in his voice, the way his entire body folded into that moment. She saw the truth in him then, not just guilt, but a desire to be better. And somehow, that mattered. Michelle pulled her journal onto her lap, flipping to the page she had written in the night before. Her own words stared back at her. Maybe this moment isn't meant to destroy us, but to redefine us. For the first time since the engagement dinner shattered, she felt steady enough to consider what that could actually mean. Redefining didn't always mean walking away. Sometimes it meant letting the foundation crack so something stronger could be built on top of the pieces. She whispered into the silence, "God, if this is meant to grow us, show me how." Her chest rose and fell slowly, the breath of someone trying to trust herself again. She finally typed a reply to Elliot, not out of pressure, but clarity. Michelle's message, "Take care of him tonight. We'll talk in the morning." Not long, not emotional, just direction and boundary. She hit send before doubt crept in. Across the city, Elliot sat on the floor beside Micah, who was asleep on the couch, his small hand still resting on Elliot's shoulder like an anchor. Elliot hadn't slept, not for a minute. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Michelle's face, the way her strength cracked quietly, the way she stepped back not because she didn't love him, but because she needed to protect her heart. He didn't blame her. He blamed himself. When his phone buzzed, he reached for it quickly, careful not to wake Micah. Michelle's message appeared on the screen. Short, measured, clear. His chest tightened in both relief and ache. She hadn't walked away. She hadn't shut him out. She hadn't ended anything. She was giving him a chance to show who he intended to be now. A father, a partner, a man who didn't abandon his responsibilities. He whispered to the quiet room, "Thank you." Micah stirred, shifting his leg across the blanket. Elliot gently adjusted the fabric, tucking it around the boy with a tenderness he didn't recognize in himself until now. "I'm here," he whispered to Micah. "I'm right here." Every few minutes, he checked the clock, counting down the hours until morning. It wasn't anxiety, it was anticipation. He needed to see Michelle, not to beg or pressure her, but to speak truthfully, without excuses. Across the city, Michelle sat curled on her couch, legs tucked beneath her, staring into the half-lit horizon through her blinds. She thought about how unexpected life could be, how it could turn a romantic night into a moment of reckoning, how a child she hadn't known existed could reshape the entire path of her future, how love could break you open and still offer a way forward if both people were willing to fight for clarity. The clock read 4:27 a.m. She would not sleep again tonight. She wasn't restless. She wasn't panicked. She simply needed to stay awake with her thoughts long enough to make sense of them. She whispered to herself, "This is what grown love looks like, not avoiding the hard things, but standing in them." By dawn, she found herself back in her bedroom, sitting on the edge of her bed with her journal open again. She wrote slowly, "I am not afraid of truth. I am afraid of repeating pain that doesn't belong to me. But something in me believes he can grow, and something in me believes we can grow too." Across the city, Elliot sat against the couch silently watching the sunrise through the wide glass window. Micah slept peacefully beside him, his small hand still clinging to Elliot's shirt. The morning light warmed the room, washing over both of them. It felt like the first morning of his entire life. He lifted his phone, opened a blank message, wrote nothing, closed it again. Not yet. Not until she was ready. Not until they were in the same room. He whispered to himself, "Just don't lose her. Don't lose the chance to be better." As the sun settled fully into the sky, both Michelle and Elliot sat awake in separate spaces, but thinking about the same conversation, the same child, the same possibility neither of them wanted to lose. Both ready for morning, both afraid of it, both hopeful in a way they didn't want to admit yet, and both thinking about the same future, Not perfect, not simple, but real. Before we move into the next chapter, let me pause here gently and say, if you're still here, subscribe. Stories get deeper from this point on. Morning light seeped through Michelle's curtains, touching her cheek gently before she was fully awake. She blinked into the stillness of her bedroom, realizing she had slept only in fragments, moments of drifting, moments of waking, and long stretches of thinking in the dark. But when she opened her eyes now, something inside felt clearer, not healed, not steady, just clearer. She sat up, rubbing the corners of her eyes, letting the quiet of the room settle around her. Her journal lay open beside her, the last line she wrote echoing through her mind. Maybe this moment isn't meant to destroy us, but to redefine us. Michelle took a deep breath. That sentence didn't erase the pain, but it opened a small doorway inside her, a doorway toward understanding instead of fear. She slipped out of bed, tied her hair into a loose bun, and walked to the kitchen, letting the familiar routine ground her. She poured water into a mug, warmed it, held it between her palms. As she sipped, she let herself feel everything without judgment. The shock, the ache, the unexpected softness she felt toward Micah, Elliot's broken voice, the weight of the future she hadn't planned for. But she also felt something else, her own resilience rising to meet the morning. By the time she dressed and grabbed her keys, she knew she needed to see them, not just Elliot but Micah too. Her heart needed clarity, not distance. He hadn't slept, but the sunrise still caught him by surprise. The soft gold touched the floor where he sat leaning against the couch, Micah curled beside him beneath a blanket. One of the boy's small hands rested against Elliot's shirt, gripping it even in sleep. That simple touch, it broke something in him in a gentle way, a way that reshaped him. Elliot studied Micah's face, the soft curve of his cheek, the steady breathing, the innocence that had survived far too much uncertainty. This was the first morning he had ever woken up beside his son, a moment he had delayed for 6 years, a moment he didn't deserve, but one he was grateful had finally arrived. Micah stirred, eyes opening slowly. When he saw Elliot, a sleepy smile spread across his face. Daddy. The word landed differently in daylight, more real, more binding. Elliot pushed a hand through his hair. Good morning, buddy. Micah sat up, rubbing his eyes. Can we make pancakes now? Elliot let out a breath that felt almost like relief. Yeah, let's do pancakes. He carried Micah to the kitchen, set him on a stool, and began searching cabinets for ingredients he rarely used. He wasn't used to cooking for anyone but himself, but today felt different, like he was stepping into a version of himself he had always hoped existed beneath the layers of fear. He handed Micah a whisk, letting the boy stir the batter. Flour dusted his small hands and cheeks, and he laughed at his own messiness. Elliot smiled, a real one this time. The innocence in the room softened the sharp edges of last night's chaos. For the first time in a long time, Elliot felt capable, not of being perfect, just of being present. She paused outside the door, letting the ocean breeze settle her nerves before knocking lightly. Inside, she heard Micah's laughter, a sound so pure it made her chest warm unexpectedly. Elliot opened the door. He looked different, not in appearance, in presence, softer, humbled, awake in a way he hadn't been before. Michelle, he said quietly, as if her name required gentleness. She nodded once. Morning. Micah peeked from behind Elliot's leg, pancake batter smudged on his cheek. Hi, he said shyly. Michelle's breath caught, but not from pain. From something else, something tender. Hey, sweetie, she replied, kneeling slightly. Micah stepped forward on his own and wrapped his small arms around her waist. The hug was unexpected, honest, warm in the kind of way that bypassed logic and went straight to the heart. Michelle's arms went around him instinctively. Her throat tightened, but not from sadness, from the strange immediate connection she felt with him. A connection she hadn't asked for, but couldn't deny. Elliot watched the moment unfold, something fragile and hopeful stirring in his eyes. Michelle pulled back slowly, brushing flour from Micah's cheek. You helping your dad cook? Micah nodded proudly. I made pancakes. You did? She smiled. I can't wait to see. Elliot stepped aside to let her in. Michelle walked into the house, carefully but willingly. Something had changed in the air. The weight of last night hadn't disappeared, but the morning brought a new kind of peace, a peace built from truth, vulnerability, and the first signs of healing. The smell of warm batter filled the kitchen as Michelle stepped fully into the house. It surprised her, not the scent itself, but how comforting it felt. She hadn't expected anything about this morning to feel gentle. Yet here she was, standing in a kitchen where Elliot was trying to flip pancakes with the determination of someone learning a new skill under pressure. He glanced at her, almost sheepishly, as if he hoped she wouldn't judge his uneven results. "I think I'm getting better," he said quietly. Michelle watched him flip a pancake that landed on the edge of the pan, half folded. Micah clapped his hands anyway. "Daddy's the best cooker." Michelle smiled before she could stop herself. Children didn't measure skill, they measured heart. And Micah saw effort, not perfection. "Is that so?" she asked him. Micah nodded confidently. "Yep." He let me stir everything. Elliot wiped flour off Micah's cheek with his thumb, the gesture tender and deliberate. Michelle saw something in his eyes, not guilt, not desperation, but intention, real intention. She leaned against the counter, watching the two of them interact. Something in her chest shifted, a soft pull she wasn't ready to name but couldn't deny. Micah climbed off his stool and wandered toward her, tugging lightly on her sleeve. "Do you want to help us?" he asked. Michelle crouched beside him. "I don't want to mess up your masterpiece." He giggled. "It's okay. Daddy already did." Elliot let out a breathy laugh. "Wow, betrayed by my own teammate." The moment was simple, but powerful, the kind of simplicity that heals quietly without asking for permission. Michelle followed Micah back to the stove, taking the whisk he offered and folding herself gently into their space. Elliot moved aside, giving her room, the respect in his posture unmistakable. "You don't have to cook," he murmured. "I mean, after everything. You don't have to be here." Michelle looked at him, really looked, and saw a man who wasn't trying to win her back with charm or apologies. He was simply present. "I know," she said softly, "but I want to." A flicker of emotion crossed his face, something like gratitude mixed with disbelief. They cooked together in a quiet rhythm, Michelle whisking, Elliot flipping, Micah adding chocolate chips with a seriousness only children could embody. At one point, Micah leaned against Michelle's side as he sprinkled the chips, his small arm brushing hers. Michelle steadied him without thinking, her hand gentle on his back. The warmth of that moment pressed into her heart. This wasn't forced. It wasn't awkward. It was natural in a way that surprised her. They sat at the small dining table, plates scattered with pancake crumbs. Micah ate enthusiastically, talking between bites, sharing stories about school, cartoons, and how he once tried to build a fort that collapsed because Daddy wasn't there to help. Elliot winced, not visibly, but Michelle saw the subtle change in his jaw, the weight of regret sitting there. She reached across the table and touched Micah's hand. "That fort sounds amazing," she said gently. Micah nodded. "It was, but it fell." Elliot leaned forward. "We can build one together sometime." Micah grinned, eyes bright. "Really? Really?" Michelle watched the exchange, her heart caught between ache and possibility. Elliot wasn't perfect, he never had been, but this version of him was different, not polished, not rehearsed, not armored, just human. The kind of human who might actually be ready to grow. While clearing dishes, Elliot walked to the sink but stopped halfway. Michelle saw his shoulders rise slightly, as if a quiet storm passed through him. She didn't move at first, didn't speak, just observed. His hands braced the counter, his head lowering, his breathing uneven. He wasn't crying, it wasn't that kind of moment, but something inside him was unraveling quietly. She approached slowly. "Elliot?" she asked softly. He inhaled shakily, eyes fixed on the sink. "I'm trying," he whispered. "I'm trying so hard to make up for everything I missed." I look at him, and I can't believe I almost chose not to be a part of his life. I can't believe I let fear decide something so important. Michelle stood beside him, her presence steady, not demanding. "You can't rebuild 6 years in one morning," she said gently. He nodded. "I know, but I want to start. I don't want to fail him again, or you." Michelle reached out, hesitating for a moment, then placed her hand over his on the counter. His breath caught at the contact. "You're here," she said. "That's where it begins." Her voice wasn't forgiving him. It wasn't promising anything. It wasn't rewriting last night. It was acknowledging the truth of this morning. Elliot finally turned toward her, eyes glistening with a raw honesty she hadn't seen from him before. "You being here means more than you know," he said quietly. Before Michelle could respond, little footsteps pattered across the floor. Micah squeezed himself between them, wrapping one arm around Michelle's leg and the other around Elliot's. A tiny bridge between two hurting adults. Michelle froze for a second, not out of discomfort, but because the moment felt unexpectedly tender. Elliot placed a hand on Micah's back, his posture softening. The three of them stood there, connected, silent, held together by a child who hadn't intended to change anyone's life but somehow changed everything. It was the first time Michelle felt the future shift in a way that wasn't frightening, a way that felt possible. Not the CEO, not the polished man who commanded rooms, but the man wiping syrup from a little boy's chin, the man crouching to tie tiny shoelaces, the man leaning in to listen as Micah spoke about dinosaurs with endless enthusiasm. A man learning, a man showing up, a man trying. This wasn't the version of Elliot who denied responsibility. This was the man rising to meet it, late but real. Michelle felt something soften inside her. Not forgiveness, not certainty, but a new beginning forming quietly beneath the fragile reality of the morning. Micah sat cross-legged on the living room rug, crayons scattered around him like tiny beams of color. He hummed quietly as he drew, head tilted in that focused way children have when their world feels safe. Michelle watched him from the couch while Elliot rinsed dishes in the kitchen, sleeves pushed up, movements slower and more thoughtful than usual. She still wasn't used to seeing Elliot this way, stripped down, unguarded, allowing himself to be seen without the protective shell he wore in the world. But something about this morning had softened him, reshaped him. Every gesture carried meaning. "Michelle," Micah said suddenly, lifting his picture with both hands. "Look." She smiled, leaning forward to take in the drawing. 3 figures stood beneath a shaky sun, one tall with dark hair, one tall with brown skin, and one small figure between them holding both their hands. Her heart fluttered. "That's beautiful," she said gently. Micah grinned, scooting closer until his knee touched her shin. "That's you and Daddy and me." Michelle swallowed, her chest warming unexpectedly. Children didn't draw fantasies. They drew feelings. And this was how he saw them. Elliot turned slightly from the sink, drying his hands with a dish towel as he watched his son offer the drawing. There was something in his eyes, something grateful, something humbled, that made Michelle look away before emotion swept too quickly into the space. "I like this one a lot," she whispered. "You can keep it," Micah said, proudly puffing his chest. "Thank you," she murmured, folding the picture gently so the edges didn't bend. Micah beamed as he dug back into his crayons with renewed excitement. Michelle sat with the drawing in her lap, fingertips brushing the waxy strokes. There was an innocence to it, but also a truth, the truth of a child already attaching himself to a new version of family. She didn't know whether to lean into that warmth or run from it, but she didn't have long to wrestle with the thought, because the twist, the quiet shift, arrived like it always does in real life, casually, unaware of the weight it carried. "Michelle," Micah asked, not looking up. "Mommy said I might not stay with her forever." Elliot froze, mid-step. The dish towel slipped slightly in his hand. Michelle's breath halted, the air in the room tightening around her. She tried to keep her voice calm, steady. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" she asked, kneeling beside him. Micah switched crayons, completely unbothered by the tension around him. She said. He paused, thinking. "She gets tired, a lot, and sometimes she cries. She said she can't do everything on her own." Michelle felt something heavy settle in her stomach. Elliot slowly stepped closer, crouching near them but not interrupting. His jaw tightened, but not from anger, from understanding. Micah kept coloring. She said daddies help make families feel easier. Michelle glanced at Elliot. His eyes were lowered, the weight in them unmistakable. This wasn't just about last night anymore. This was about responsibility, real responsibility, one he had evaded for years. "And she said," Micah continued, tapping the green crayon against the paper, "she thinks Daddy's ready now." Elliot pressed his fingertips against his knee, grounding himself. He inhaled deeply, and Michelle could see, truly see, how those words cut and healed him at the same time. He wasn't prepared for this truth, but he wasn't rejecting it either. Michelle shifted slightly so she could see both of them. "Micah," she said softly, "do you like being here?" He nodded immediately. "Yeah." "It's calm." That word landed like a small earthquake. Calm. A boy should not crave calm at 6 years old. Calm should be normal, not rare. Michelle felt something tighten painfully in her chest, Not from judgment toward the woman who raised him, not from fear, but from a sudden, fierce tenderness toward this child's heart. Elliot let out a slow breath he had been holding for too long. "Michelle," he whispered, voice unsteady. "I didn't know she felt that overwhelmed." Michelle placed a hand on the carpet to steady herself. "I don't think she wanted you to know," she said quietly. "Some women try to carry everything alone, even when it hurts." That truth had its own sting, one Michelle understood too well. Elliot nodded slowly, emotion gathering in the space between them. "I should have been there," he murmured. The admission didn't come from guilt this time. It came from realization, a deep, honest understanding of the cost of his absence. Micah looked up at them both, completely unaware of the magnitude of what he had just revealed. "Daddy?" he asked. "Yes," Elliot answered, voice soft. "Can I stay with you sometimes?" Elliot closed his eyes briefly, not to hide emotion, but to gather himself before he spoke. When he opened them, his voice held a quiet certainty Michelle had never heard from him before. "You can stay with me any time," he said. Micah smiled, then went right back to coloring as if the world hadn't shifted. Because for him, the world already made sense, a child's clarity untouched by adult fear. Michelle watched them in silence, her heart tightening with a mixture of warmth and uncertainty. The pieces of her future were rearranging right in front of her, not with chaos, but with truth. Elliot turned toward her slowly. "What he said," he whispered, "changes things." Michelle nodded. "Yes, it does. I have to do right by him," Elliot said. "Not halfway, not part-time, fully." Michelle studied him. His posture was steady now, his shoulders no longer heavy with avoidance, but squared with intention. "I think you're ready," she said softly. "Really ready?" The words came from someplace honest, deeper than she expected. They surprised her, but they also felt true. Elliot looked at her, something tender in his eyes. "And I want to do this," he said, "for him and for us. If we get another chance." Michelle didn't respond right away. Her heart wasn't rushing toward yes, but it wasn't walking away either. She placed the drawing gently on the coffee table. "We take it one step at a time," she said. "No pressure, no rushing, just truth." Elliot nodded, visibly relieved. The room settled into a quiet that didn't feel heavy this time, a quiet full of possibility, the kind that comes when honesty cracks open a new pathway forward. Michelle leaned back on her hands, watching Micah color, watching Elliot watch his son, and for the first time since this entire ordeal began, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in days. Hope, not the soft, naive kind. The grown kind, the type built from truth, humility, and effort. The kind that wasn't guaranteed, but worth exploring. And as Elliot moved closer, sitting gently on the floor beside her, not touching, just present, something in her heart whispered that this story was far from breaking. It was beginning. Quietly, carefully, unsettled but promising, exactly the way real healing begins. The morning sun had shifted high above the Ocean View house by the time Elliot stepped outside to make a call he should have made years ago. He stood on the balcony, hands gripping the railing, the ocean breeze brushing against his shirt as he inhaled deeply. This wasn't a conversation he wanted to have. It was a conversation he needed to have. Inside, Michelle watched Micah finish coloring another picture, her heart still processing the revelation he had shared earlier. She glanced toward the balcony where Elliot stood, shoulders tight, posture purposeful. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was preparing. Elliot finally tapped the call button. The ring felt long, even though it lasted only a few seconds. When his ex answered, her voice sounded tired, a tiredness that carried months, maybe years of strain. He swallowed. "Can we talk?" Silence pressed at the other end before she said, "I figured this call was coming." Elliot stared out at the water, grounding himself. "I'm sorry," he said. "No explanations, no excuses, just the truth." She let out a breath he could practically feel through the phone. "I didn't want to do all this alone, Elliot. I didn't want to be the only one figuring out what he needed." "I know," he said quietly. "And you disappeared," she added, voice cracking just slightly. "Not physically, but emotionally. You pretended he didn't exist." Elliot closed his eyes. "You're right." The softness in his tone wasn't weakness, it was responsibility settling into his bones. "I can't change the years I missed," he continued, "but I can change everything from this day forward. She exhaled shakily, the exhaustion of long nights, hard choices, and overwhelming responsibility threading through her breaths. Do you know how many times I tried to tell you he needed you? I do now. A pause stretched between them, a pause filled with unspoken battles, old pain, and a mother's quiet resilience. I wasn't ready then, Elliot said, but I'm ready now. Her voice wavered, not from anger, but from relief and fatigue intertwining. He adores you, you know. Even without knowing you, Elliot felt something tighten deeply inside him. I want to be in his life, he said firmly, fully, consistently. Not as a visitor, as his father. Another pause. I'm tired, Elliot, she admitted softly. Some days I feel like I'm holding everything together with one hand. That line cut him, but it also woke him. You shouldn't have had to, he whispered. He pressed a hand to his forehead, guilt and clarity meeting in the same moment. I want to share responsibility, he continued. Legally, emotionally, practically. I want to show up. Her breath sounded lighter this time, still cautious, still unsure, but lighter. I'll need time to adjust, she said. But I believe you. He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Thank you. Just don't make promises you can't keep, she warned gently. I won't, he said, not out of confidence, but commitment. They ended the call quietly, respectfully, not as lovers, not as enemies, but as two people trying to do right by a child who deserved stability. He wasn't tense. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't overwhelmed. He was steady. Everything okay? She asked softly. He nodded slowly, taking a moment before speaking. I talked to her, really talked to her. Michelle set aside the picture she had been folding. And I apologized. No explanations, no stories, just the truth. Michelle watched him, her expression unreadable but warm. I told her, I'm ready to step up, he added. Not halfway, fully. She nodded once. That's what Micah needs. That's what all of this needs, Elliot said, his eyes meeting hers with sincerity she could feel down to her chest. He walked toward her, not too close, not pressuring, just present. I can't undo the past, he continued quietly, but I can take responsibility for it, and I can build something better from here. Michelle breathed in slowly. This was different, not rehearsed, not performative, not afraid. It was the clarity she had needed to see. What did she say? Michelle asked. That she believes me, he replied, but she needs consistency, and honestly, so do I. Michelle's gaze softened just slightly. That's fair, she said. Consistency builds trust. Elliot nodded. I'm ready for that. From the living room, Micah called out, Daddy, I made another picture. Michelle smiled without realizing it. Elliot turned toward the sound of his son's voice, and the ease in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't doing this out of guilt anymore. He was doing it out of love, out of growth, out of new responsibility. Elliot wasn't trying to rewrite the past. He was building a foundation for the future. And for the first time, her fear loosened enough to let a small thread of trust weave itself into place. Not a promise, not a commitment, just the start of belief that healing was possible. And the truth was, that mattered more than anything else right now. Afternoon light spilled through the living room window, giving the space a soft warmth that contrasted the emotional storms of the night before. Michelle sat on the couch, hands folded loosely in her lap, watching Micah stack blocks into a tall tower. Every so often, he'd glance up at her as if to make sure she saw his progress. She smiled at him, and for the first time in a long while, that smile felt unforced. Elliot walked out of the hallway after finishing a call with his ex. His steps were slow, thoughtful, not heavy the way they used to be. He paused when he saw Michelle watching Micah, and he took a quiet breath before speaking. Can we talk? He asked gently. Michelle nodded and stood, brushing her palms against her jeans. Sure. They moved toward the balcony, not shutting the door, just stepping far enough away to give themselves room to speak, while still keeping an eye on Micah. Outside, the breeze touched her skin, cool and steady. She crossed her arms lightly, not defensively, but to center herself. Elliot leaned against the railing, head lowered for a moment before lifting his gaze toward her. He didn't rush, didn't deflect, didn't try to charm his way into her forgiveness. He just stood there, honest, bare, present. Thank you for being here today, he began. You didn't have to be. And I know last night was overwhelming. Michelle nodded once. It was. But today feels different. A soft breath escaped him, a relieved one. I never wanted to hurt you, he said. Michelle held up a hand gently. I know. But wanting not to hurt someone and actually protecting them are two different things. He swallowed at that. Not offended, not defensive. Just receiving the truth. You're right, he said. And I didn't do the second part. I avoided responsibility because I was scared of what facing the truth would say about me. She didn't interrupt. She let him speak. But when I saw him last night, his voice cracked slightly. It broke something in me, in a way that felt necessary. Michelle's eyes softened, not from pity, but from recognition of someone trying. I've lived my whole life avoiding the parts of myself I didn't like, Elliot continued. But none of that matters anymore. What matters now is him, and you. Michelle exhaled slowly. This was the moment. The real conversation, not the emotional outbursts from last night or the quiet observation of this morning. She stepped closer, resting her palm lightly against the balcony rail. I need you to understand something, Elliot, she began, her voice calm but firm. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm not asking you to erase the past. But if we are going to rebuild anything, I need stability. I need consistency. I need honesty that doesn't disappear when things get hard. He nodded immediately, not as a promise, but as comprehension. I can do that, he said. Michelle continued, and I need you to earn trust slowly, not with big declarations, not with romantic gestures, with daily effort, with presence, with accountability. His eyes held hers, steady and clear. I want that, he said softly. I want to earn you back the right way, not because I deserve it, but because I'm willing to grow into the man who won't lose you again. The sincerity in his voice made her chest warm, not melting, not surrendering, just warming. She stepped closer until she stood directly in front of him, the ocean behind them, the weight of truth between them. I want to be with someone I can rely on, she said. Someone who shows up, someone who doesn't run when life gets messy. I'm done running, he replied quietly. Michelle studied his face, and for the first time she saw something she hadn't seen clearly before. Not guilt, not panic, not fear, but commitment, a grown kind of commitment. She softened just enough to let that recognition settle. This isn't about punishment, she said. It's about rebuilding, slowly, with intention. I'm ready for slow, he said. I'm ready for intentional. Michelle didn't rush her next words. Every syllable needed to land. If we move forward, she said carefully, you can't expect me to pretend none of this hurt. You can't expect me to bounce back overnight. My heart needs time. I'll give it as much time as it needs, he answered. She held his gaze for a long moment, a moment quiet enough to feel the shift between them. Not reunion, not certainty, but alignment, mutual understanding, a new starting point, the kind built not from fantasy, but from truth. The sound broke the tension in the best way. Michelle turned toward the living room, smiling at the sight of him collecting the blocks to start over. Elliot let out a quiet laugh of his own. He's relentless, he murmured. Kids usually are, Michelle said softly. She walked back inside and Elliot followed, but with a respectful distance, not crowding her, not rushing the moment. This was the new version of him she was beginning to see. Michelle sat on the rug beside Micah. What happened here? She asked playfully. My tower fell, he said proudly, as if collapsing a structure were an achievement. Looks like you get to build it again. Yep. Micah nodded enthusiastically. Want to help? Michelle glanced at Elliot. He watched her gently, a quiet invitation in his eyes. She picked up a block. Yeah, I'll help. Micah beamed, scooting closer to her. Elliot sat across from them, handing over blocks as they rebuilt the tower piece by piece. It wasn't a perfect tower. It leaned slightly to the left. Some pieces didn't match, some pieces wobbled, but they built it together, slow, steady, intentional. And something about that felt symbolic in a way Michelle didn't need to name. As the three of them worked, Michelle noticed how Elliot interacted, patient, gentle, fully present. He didn't try to take over. He didn't correct Micah's choices. He encouraged him softly. Good job. That works. Try another one on top. Michelle felt her heart warm again, this time deeper. Not romantic warmth, not instant forgiveness, but recognition. He's changing. He's growing. He's showing up. And that mattered. When the tower finally stood tall, uneven but proud, Micah raised his hands in triumph. "We did it," he shouted. Michelle laughed softly. "Yes, we did." Elliot looked at her as the tower swayed slightly in the center of the rug. "Rebuilding takes teamwork," he said quietly. Michelle met his gaze. "So does love." The words came out before she could second-guess them, but she didn't want them back, because this wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a commitment. It was an acknowledgement of possibility, of a heart opening, cautiously, intentionally, but genuinely. The first real step toward something new. The sun hung lower in the sky by the time Micah finished his third drawing of the day. He ran across the living room, bare feet pattering against the hardwood floor, waving the paper proudly above his head. "Michelle, Daddy, look." Michelle turned from the kitchen counter where she was rinsing a cup, and Elliot stepped out of the hallway at the same time. Micah skidded to a stop between them, arms stretched high, cheeks glowing with excitement. He thrust the paper into Michelle's hands first. She unfolded it carefully, 3 figures again. But this time, the artwork was more detailed. The tall figure on the left had Elliot's hair. The tall figure on the right had Michelle's curly bun, and the small figure between them held both of their hands. Above their heads was a single word written in wobbly letters, "Us." Michelle's breath caught softly, not from fear, not from pain, but from something warm rising slowly in her chest. She glanced down at Micah. "You drew us?" she asked gently. Micah nodded big and confident. "Yep." "'Cause I like being with both of you." Elliot stepped closer, looking over Michelle's shoulder. When he saw the drawing, his lips parted slightly, and his pulse visibly softened. He crouched beside his son. "You did this?" Micah nodded again. "We're a team now." Michelle's knees almost weakened. Children didn't speak in metaphors. Their words were truth without strategy. Elliot rubbed the back of Micah's head lightly. "You're right," he said quietly. "We are." Michelle folded the paper neatly and tucked it near her purse as if protecting something sacred. That drawing, simple, childlike, uneven, felt like the first brick laid in a new foundation. "Do you want to get some fresh air?" he asked. Michelle raised an eyebrow. "Where?" He nodded toward the window where the sky was beginning to shift orange. "The beach." Michelle hesitated for a moment, not because she didn't want to go, but because the moment felt big, bigger than it seemed on the surface. The beach had always been her place to release emotion, to breathe, to reflect. And now he was asking to share that with her. Micah jumped in excitement. "Beach, beach, beach." Michelle laughed softly at his enthusiasm. She grabbed her jacket. "All right, let's go." Micah sang gently in the back seat, kicking his heels against the upholstery. Elliot kept glancing at Michelle, not out of pressure, but out of quiet appreciation that she was here, still choosing to show up with him. The air inside the car felt peaceful, a peace earned, not given. When they arrived at the beach, the breeze brushed Michelle's hair back, the scent of salt water filling her chest with calm. Elliot carried a small tote with snacks and a blanket, and Micah ran ahead to the edge of the sand, before turning around and waiting for them patiently. Michelle watched Elliot kneel to help Micah remove his shoes, rolling his pant legs up so he wouldn't get soaked on the shoreline. There was something deeply grounding in the way he did it. Gentle hands, steady posture, no rush. Consistency, the thing she needed most. Micah ran between them, splashing lightly as the tide came in, squealing each time the cold water touched his ankles. Michelle laughed, the sound genuine and bright, and Elliot watched her for a moment, not in longing but in quiet admiration. This was the version of her he loved most, joyful, open, lighter than the fears she carried. At one point, Micah slipped on wet sand and wobbled. Michelle reached out for him instinctively. Elliot did too. Their hands met on Micah's shoulders. All three paused. Michelle felt the warmth of Elliot's hand briefly touch hers before he eased back respectfully. Micah looked up and giggled. "I'm okay." Michelle's heart softened again, this time deeper. The wind tugged gently at her clothes as she bent down to brush sand from Micah's legs. Elliot knelt beside her, careful not to invade her space. "You're good at this," Michelle said without thinking. Elliot blinked, almost startled by the compliment. "Being his dad? Being present," she said softly. His eyes lowered, humbled by the acknowledgement. "I'm trying," he murmured. "I know," she replied. And she did, not because of words, not because of promises, because of moments like this, quiet, real, consistent. The three of them sat together, watching the waves roll in rhythmic patterns. The sky shifted into deeper shades of orange and pink, painting the horizon with soft layers of color. Micah leaned against Michelle's side, his head resting gently on her arm. She looked down, heart warming at the trust he offered so freely. Elliot watched the two of them from the other side of the blanket, something tender filling his eyes, not ownership, not expectation, but gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly. Michelle looked up. "For what?" "For not giving up on today," he replied. "For showing up. For giving me space to be better." Michelle held his gaze. The wind moved through his hair, and his eyes looked less weighted, more open. "I'm not giving you anything you haven't earned today," she said. "And that's how this has to continue." He nodded. "I understand. And I want to keep earning it." Micah interrupted their moment by crawling into Michelle's lap. "Look," he said, pointing toward the horizon. "The sky's changing." Michelle wrapped her arms around him from behind. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It looks like a painting," Elliot added. Micah stretched a hand toward the sky, as if trying to catch a piece of the sunset. "Can we stay until it gets dark?" he asked. Michelle and Elliot exchanged a glance, a soft, shared understanding forming between them. "Yeah," Michelle said. "We can stay." Micah held Michelle's left hand. He held Elliot's right hand. A small bridge between two hearts learning to meet in the middle. Their silhouettes stretched long across the sand as the sky deepened into twilight. Michelle looked down at Micah, then over at Elliot. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel fear when imagining a future that included him. For the first time, she felt possibility. Not guaranteed, not fragile, not rushed, just possible. Their fingers tightened gently, not in romance, but in unity, a beginning. Not forced, not perfect, not defined yet, but real. And sometimes, real is the best place to start. The next few weeks carried a different rhythm, not dramatic, not rushed, but steady. Steady in a way Elliot had never been before. He woke each morning with purpose, and for the first time in years that purpose wasn't tied to deadlines or quarterly projections. It was tied to Micah, and to the quiet determination to rebuild Michelle's trust, piece by piece. Elliot had always been good at achieving goals. He excelled at structure, discipline, results. But this was different. This required humility, vulnerability, patience, and a willingness to be uncomfortable while learning. He started with therapy, not because Michelle asked him to, not because anyone pressured him, but because he knew he needed to understand the fear that had kept him distant for so long. His therapist was direct, the kind of person who didn't let him hide behind polished words or successful man armor. They talked about his fear of repeating his own father's mistakes, his belief that he wasn't ready for parenthood, the shame he carried from abandoning responsibility, the guilt that shadowed every decision since. Every session peeled away a layer he didn't know how to face before. And every session, he learned. Meanwhile, he enrolled in parenting classes, real hands-on ones held in a community center where fathers practiced. How to regulate emotions for their children, how to support bedtime routines, how to create emotional safety, how to communicate love consistently, not conditionally. The first class humbled him. The second challenged him. The third gave him confidence. By the fifth, he began understanding fatherhood not as performance, but presence. He didn't brag about these classes. He didn't tell Michelle immediately. He let the changes reveal themselves naturally. He showed up for Micah without hesitation. Early mornings, evening calls, weekends filled with puzzle building, playground visits, and gentle questions about school. Micah bloomed under that consistency. Not dramatically, not loudly, but in small, noticeable ways. His drawings became more detailed. He slept more soundly. He laughed more openly. He said daddy with certainty instead of curiosity. And every time Michelle saw the two of them together, something inside her shifted. Subtly at first, then unmistakably. Because Elliot wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't waiting for praise. He was learning, growing, adjusting, showing up. Even on days he felt insecure or afraid. That was new. That was real. That was what rebuilding looked like. Micah's hand swung in Elliot's, their steps synced, their laughter carrying upward to her apartment balcony. She pressed a hand to her heart, not because it hurt, but because it felt full in a way she hadn't allowed in months. When they reached her door, she opened it before they knocked. "Hey," Elliot said, slightly out of breath from chasing Micah up the steps. "Hi," she replied warmly. Micah rushed past them into the living room. I made something. Michelle laughed. You always make something. He returned with another drawing, but this one was different. It wasn't the three of them. It wasn't a family scene. It was Elliot kneeling beside him, teaching him how to tie his shoes. Michelle glanced up. Elliot rubbed the back of his neck. We practiced today. You did good, she said softly. There was no hesitation in her voice, no guarded pause, just honesty. Elliot would drop by after therapy sometimes, not asking for emotional support, just wanting to see Micah before bedtime. Michelle would occasionally walk with them to the park after work. There were moments when their hands brushed accidentally, moments when their eyes lingered a second too long, but neither rushed the process. Because they both understood. This wasn't about rushing back into romance. This was about building a foundation that could actually hold love. A love that didn't ignore truth. A love that didn't avoid responsibility. A love that grew from real, earned trust. Michelle washed dishes while he dried. The simple domesticity of it felt intimate in a way she didn't expect. Elliot broke the quiet first. I'm not trying to be perfect, he said quietly. I'm just trying to be better, for him, and for us. If you let there be an us again. Michelle paused, dish in hand. I see that, she replied. He looked over at her, searching her face. And, does any of it matter to you? Michelle set the dish down, drying her hands with a towel. It does, she said, more than you know. But I'm not rushing into anything. Trust is built slowly. Just like you're learning to show up for him, you have to show up for me too. He nodded, absorbing every word. I can do that, he whispered. Michelle stepped closer, not touching him, just allowing proximity. And I'm willing to let you, she said. Not a promise, not a guarantee, but permission to keep trying. A bridge, a beginning. His shoulders looked different now, not heavy with guilt, but steady with purpose. And as he walked down the hallway, something inside her whispered the truth. He's proving himself. Not with speeches, not with apologies, with action, real, daily action. And that mattered more than anything she had hoped for. Michelle's journal lay open across her lap, resting on the same quilt she'd had since college. Soft, worn on the edges, smelling faintly of lavender from years of comfort. She sat cross-legged on her bed, pen tapping gently against the page as she stared at the half-finished sentence in front of her. She had written, loving someone shouldn't cost me myself, and below that, but maybe it doesn't have to. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet fill the room. The light from her bedside lamp cast a soft glow, warm against her skin. She inhaled deeply, feeling the residue of fear in her chest, but alongside it, something new. Not hope, not certainty, just room, emotional room. For the first time since the rooftop, Michelle felt like she wasn't standing in reaction to pain anymore. She was standing in a place of choosing. Choosing who she wanted to be. Choosing what she wanted her life to look like. And whether she liked it or not, Elliot's recent actions took root in that picture. She picked up her pen again. I'm learning that boundaries aren't walls, they're doors, and I decide who walks through them. She paused, letting the truth settle into her chest. It felt steady, clear, a form of strength she hadn't accessed before. Her grandmother used to tell her, "Baby, don't confuse protecting your heart with locking it away." Michelle felt that wisdom now more than ever. She didn't announce she was coming. She didn't text ahead. She came because she wanted to see, not hear, the growth. She wanted to witness the man he was becoming with her own eyes. When she arrived, she spotted him through the window of an open classroom door. Elliot sat among a circle of fathers, some young, some older, all listening intently to the instructor. He wasn't postured for show. He wasn't nodding at everything just to appear engaged. He was leaning forward, elbows on his knees, brows drawn in concentration, like he was learning an entirely new language, like he cared. Michelle didn't interrupt. She watched quietly. The instructor passed out stuffed animals meant to simulate toddlers in meltdown. The room filled with groans and laughter. Elliot accepted the small bear and practiced soothing techniques, rubbing slow circles on its back, murmuring reassurances, holding it in a steady position. He looked gentle, relaxed, human in a way she rarely saw during their early days. When class ended, he stepped into the hallway, stopping short when he saw her. "Michelle." His voice softened immediately. "Hi," she said, hands in her pockets, trying to steady the flutter in her chest. "What are you doing here?" he asked. Not accusing, just surprised. She shrugged lightly. I wanted to see how you're doing. His eyes warmed, the kind of warmth that didn't ask for anything. It just appreciated. Well, he said, scratching the back of his neck, I'm a work in progress. Aren't we all? She replied. He chuckled softly, then sobered. I didn't want you to feel like I was doing any of this to win you back. I'm doing it because Micah deserves a present father, and because I need to grow into someone I'm proud of. Michelle nodded. I can see that. For the first time since everything unraveled, she reached out and touched his arm, lightly. Not as a promise, as acknowledgement. You're doing well, Elliot, she said gently. Really well. A quiet sigh left him, relief mixed with something vulnerable. Thank you, he whispered. She wrote quickly, her thoughts flowing with clarity she had waited weeks to feel. He's growing without asking me to shrink. That matters. That's what makes love safe. She wiped a stray tear from her cheek, not from sadness, but release. She lay back against her pillows and stared at the ceiling, letting her heart finally speak without filtering itself through fear. She missed him. Not the early polished version of him, not the charming man who swept her off her feet, but the man she saw now, messy, sincere, trying with everything in him. She felt herself soften, not into dependency, but into truth. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory again. Baby, real love don't erase you. It meets you. Michelle whispered into the quiet. I still love him. Saying it didn't feel weak. It felt honest. It felt like choosing herself and her heart at the same time. Micah ran ahead of them toward the swings, laughing as he pumped his legs. Michelle and Elliot walked slowly behind him. Thank you for coming, Elliot said. Thank you for asking, she replied. They watched Micah drag his feet to stop the swing, then jump off, running in circles through the grass. Michelle glanced sideways at Elliot. How are you feeling about everything? He exhaled thoughtfully, a little scared, a lot grateful. I'm learning how to separate effort from fear. And about us? She asked. Elliot slowed his steps, looking her full in the face. Michelle, I want you. But I want you the right way this time, with your boundaries, with your strength, with your voice leading the pace. She felt that sentence all the way through her chest. And what does that look like for you? She asked softly. It looks like earning your trust every day, he said. It looks like showing up even when you need space. It looks like building something steady, not rushing into something fragile. Her breath shook, not with fear, but with recognition. She stepped a little closer, the space between them shrinking naturally. I'm not afraid of loving you, she said quietly. I'm afraid of losing myself. You won't, he replied. Not with me. Not anymore. Michelle looked at him, really looked, and saw a man who had grown into someone worth choosing. Not perfect, not healed in every place, but intentional, present, worth loving, not dramatic, not forced, not cinematic, real. Elliot reached out slowly, giving her room to refuse. She didn't. Their fingers brushed lightly before intertwining, a simple gesture, but one that lit something warm and steady inside her. She stepped closer until her forehead rested gently against his chest. He exhaled shakily, closing his eyes. No apologies. No promises. Just connection. Michelle whispered, I want to try again. But this time, I lead the pace. Elliot nodded, emotion thick in his throat. Anything you need, he murmured. She pulled back just enough to look at him. And she swallowed. I need you to keep being the man you're becoming. I will, he said. I will, Michelle. Their hands stayed intertwined as Micah ran toward them, jumping into the center of their embrace. And for the first time, it didn't feel complicated. It felt right. A family, not fully formed, not finalized, but real. Growing, healing, becoming. The following weeks settled into a quiet, warm rhythm, the kind that didn't erase the past, but allowed space for something new to grow. Michelle moved at her own pace, keeping her boundaries steady. Elliot respected every one of them without question. And Micah, bright, eager, overflowing with love, became the soft glue holding the three of them together. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't forced. It was steady, and steady felt like safety. Steady felt like home. She pulled back the curtain to see Elliot and Micah in the courtyard of her apartment building. Micah was chasing bubbles. Elliot blew into the air, trying to pop them before they reached the grass. Michelle smiled without meaning to, her heart softening at the sight of it, not because it was adorable, though it was, but because it represented something she had once been afraid to want. Consistency, joy, a life that wasn't chaotic or painful, a life where love did not require losing herself. She stepped outside in her slippers, wrapping her robe tighter around her waist. Micah spotted her first. "Michelle, come help me catch them." She laughed, walking toward them. "Are you sure you're fast enough?" "Yes," he shouted. "Daddy said I'm super fast." Elliot glanced up at her, quiet warmth in his eyes. "Good morning," he said softly. "Morning," she replied, her smile lingering. It was a simple exchange, but it carried weight. A weight built from healing, not expectation. At one point, Micah drew 3 hearts connected by lines. "This one is you, Michelle." He pointed to the heart on the right. "This one is Daddy." He pointed to the left. "And this one is me," he said proudly, pointing to the one in the middle. Michelle swallowed, emotion rising. "You drew us again," she whispered. "Because we match," Micah replied, as if it were the most obvious truth in the world. Elliot looked at her gently, not asking for anything, not pushing, just letting the moment breathe between them. Michelle touched the chalk, drawing lightly with her fingertips. Maybe they did match, in a way none of them planned, none of them expected. Michelle hesitated only briefly before saying yes. Micah held her hand as they walked, excitedly pointing out birds, boats, and the color of the sky. They found a quiet spot near the railings overlooking the water. The breeze came in soft waves, brushing the air around them with a calm, cool touch. Micah climbed up on the bottom rail, safely between them, holding both their hands as he peered out at the ocean. Elliot watched Michelle quietly. She noticed. "What?" she asked, a soft laugh in her voice. He shook his head slightly. "Just grateful." "For what?" "For you giving us another chance, for letting me grow, for letting me show up, for trusting me with your heart slowly, the way it deserves." Michelle looked out at the horizon, the sunlight shimmering across the water. "I'm doing what feels right," she said simply. "And what feels right?" he asked gently. She didn't answer immediately, not because she didn't know, but because the truth felt sacred in her chest. She turned toward him. "You do," she whispered. Elliot's breath hitched, not out of shock, but out of deep, quiet emotion. He took her hand slowly, giving her room to pull away. She didn't. They stood in silence, the 3 of them watching the waves crash in soft, rhythmic patterns. Then Micah tugged on their arms. "Are you going to marry Michelle now?" he asked, looking up with complete innocence. Michelle nearly choked, laughing as she placed a hand over her chest. "Micah, what?" he asked, confused. "You love each other." Elliot blinked at his son, stunned by how easily children break silence adults struggle with. Michelle shook her head playfully at Micah, but Elliot's expression shifted. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but with a calm certainty that seemed to settle into him like truth taking shape. He knelt down, not dramatically, just naturally. But he didn't reach for a ring. Instead, he reached for Michelle's hands. She froze. "Elliot." He looked up at her, eyes steady, voice quiet. "I don't want to make this moment bigger than it needs to be. I don't want fireworks or an audience. I just want honesty." Michelle felt her breath catch. He continued. "The first time I asked you to marry me, I didn't fully understand what partnership meant. I didn't understand responsibility. I didn't understand myself." She felt emotion pull at her throat. "But now, after everything, I know the kind of man I want to be. For him." He glanced at Micah. "And for you." Her heart squeezed. Elliot held her hands a little tighter. "So I'm asking again. Not with a grand gesture, not with a crowd, just with my whole heart." Michelle's eyes softened, warmth filling her chest in slow, steady waves. He looked up at her with a vulnerability she had never seen so clearly. "Michelle, will you marry me, not for a perfect love, but for a real one?" Her breath trembled. A tear slipped down her cheek. Not from pain, from release. She took a slow step forward, kneeling down with him so their eyes were level. "Yes," she whispered, "not because everything is fixed, not because the past didn't hurt, but because the future feels real. With you." Elliot's eyes glistened. Micah squealed. "You're getting married." Michelle laughed through her tears as Micah climbed between them, wrapping his arms around both of their necks. "Wait," Micah said suddenly. He stood up straight, puffing out his chest proudly. I want to do something. He grabbed both their hands and placed them together, Michelle's and Elliot's, pressing them firmly. There, he said. Now you're really together. Michelle and Elliot looked at each other, hands bound by the innocent insistence of a child who believed in love without hesitation. Elliot leaned forward and kissed her. Soft, warm, intentional. No rush, no fear, no apology. Just truth, just love, just a new beginning, right where the last one fell apart.